Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. The world changes when the mind moves. And so, this is a very interesting idea. Because if we conclude, am I live right now? Should be. Yeah. One can say the mind moves through the directing of the attention through language. Now, when we say when the mind moves, the world changes, it is an implication that your attention can change the value, the interpretive value of your outcome. I'll give you an example. When I was younger, like I don't know, I was really young, like 7, or I think younger than 7. I was afraid of the dark, and I remember asking my parents and asking my mother, and my mother, of course, she had she was raised in a religious family, and she told me say, for example, the name of God, Bismillah Rahman Rahim, like 7 times, right? So you got to consider Iran is a theocratical society. It's a society where religion is more intimate to the psychology of the person than I guess other societies. Now I remember after that moment, anytime anything would occur that would discomfort me, I would just start, saying this mantra, the name of God, repeated 7 times, right? And so I later on realized that was a sort of coping mechanism of my intelligence. That means it was as if, like, at that young age, I felt I had to do something about a problem that had entered my life, and it's like anything you do has a certain value, in a certain context. People have approached this notion of a mind differently. Literally, in this lifetime, at least me personally, I have been introduced to many ways in regards to approaching the mind. The mind has become a kind of cause and effect field for me. The mind has become an endless, infinite dimension for me. The mind has become an empty void for me. The mind has become a polished mirror for me. And since many moments of my life, there has been various interpretations of my own intelligence and the intelligence of the world that I entertained. Eventually, I realized that attention is the common denominator. How you were aware that you were paying attention is primarily the same in every moment. That means every moment, of course, the moment was different. Like I tell you, think about 10 years ago, you had a totally different physical body and appearance and totally different psychological momentum. I want to share some quotes from Leo Tolstoy. He says, Leo Tolstoy was a Russian writer and profound thinker. He says, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. Very true what he says. He says, respect was invented to cover the empty place where love should be. You know, Leo Tolstoy says it is amazing how complete is the delusion that beauty is goodness. So, Leo Tolstoy went night clubbing, I see. Leo Tolstoy says, if you want to be happy, be. Simply as that. He says, rummaging in our souls, we often dig up something that ought to have lain there unnoticed. Leo Tolstoy says the changes in our life must come from the impossibility to live, otherwise to the demands of our conscience, not from our mental resolution to try a new form of life. This one's a complex one. Let me go over it again. He says the changes in our life must come from the impossibility to live otherwise, to the demands of our conscience, not from our mental resolution to try a new form of life. Yeah, I think I get it. What Leo Tolstoy is saying is that you have to kind of see your conscience is like a more deeper program within you that is moving you. You know, we can say the conscience is the voice of your subconscious mind. And so he's saying we got to see these things that we're doing unconsciously rather than constantly trying to update the conscious with a new vision. And that is very true. The notion that you have to pay attention to yourself before you can transform anything else. Yourself is like your main flashlight you're holding in your hand. What are you lighting up with the idea of yourself? What does the idea of yourself mean? Sometimes playfully, I get my mind conceptualizes aerial viewpoints of myself. So I'm kind of like walking, and then I just imagine if I was 100 meters in the sky, how would I see myself? So my mind playfully sometimes projects upon itself aerial views. During these aerial views, I get a sense that I am seeing myself from a point that is not limited to my body. Any moment I experience something like this, the only way I experience it is with the trust in the unconscious. So right now we can say the human intelligence is being defined by its uniqueness, by how different it is, you know? But human intelligence has not embraced the unconscious. When you embrace the unconscious, your consciousness, it's as if it's living with other storylines. You can save that moment when Superman wore a cape was... The world changes when the mind moves. And how the mind moves has to do with how the world moves. And how the world overall moves has to do with how the mind has chosen to identify itself. It's kind of like a give and take relationship. The world is giving you a certain DNA, a certain design, and then you are kind of looking at the world, and the world is asking you, what are you? As if the world has given you your truth and is asking you again, what is your truth? You know? It tends to be mainly with acknowledgement. Anytime you hear stories of theosophical implication, stories that there are other realms, other dimensions that we can communicate to and whatnot, in any of those moments you suddenly realize you have kind of positioned and projected the moment of life as a dualism, and this dualism will echo. It is a echoing duality. You will find these. You know, sometimes you can change where you are, but unless you change your mind, the world doesn't change. That means the inner reality doesn't change. Think of it in the sense that you're responsible for two worlds. One world is the external world. You have to be very responsible for this, and you cannot just do anything in the external world. The external world is like this kind of program outside of the domain of your mind. And when I say it's outside of the domain of your mind, that means your free will identifies with being separate from the intelligence of the world as being its own intelligence. Pretty much the particle that is in the intelligence of the field of intelligence, like literally in a field of intelligence, there's a particle that thinks it's intelligence. That intelligence, the ego exists as long as God is not seen. Certain schools of thought believe even the ego is God. This, I forget the guy's name, but it was like this kind of professor, this doctor, who had become spiritual. Suddenly on stage, he started shouting, "That ego you're talking about is God." So imagine you realizing your ego is God. What does that mean? That's another way of saying your attention is the whole world. That's kind of crazy, no? Everybody thinks they have egos, but then they wonder what is it that is having the ego, and that is attributeless. It cannot be defined by the limitations of the ego. It is a battling of stories behind our eyes. I am telling you. My voice right now is not the first on this battlefield. There's so many ideologies and systems. Sometimes when I walk in society and I just see people and I see certain systems, you know, it has, at first I wouldn't care about it, but later on my mind found a way to catch it. And what that means is I realized, kind of the moment you realize you're not a thought, thoughts can be as observed as objective reality. Like literally, if there's an object in front of you and you can see it, all its sides and whatnot, the moment you realize you're not a thought, you have the same relationship as you have with an object with a subject. What that means is if you close your eyes, because you know you're not a thought, you can experience the abstraction or the subjectivity to any degree. That means there are moments where I can become a thought. It is very easy to become a thought. You just kind of put up the tent and go sit inside. But to be more than a thought, that is what's fascinating. It's like no longer people want to hear other people's thoughts. They want to see where all thoughts are going. What's the point of these thoughts? And so it has to do with the revision and the updating of the collective vision. Because we are only left with two choices. We either all of us become inefficiently separated as human beings, and we become a species that never discovered its true self. The true self of your existence is not an individual relationship with the cosmos, which your ego is. That is not only it. There's greater dimensions, there's deeper truths. You cross the sea wondering what is underneath. And anywhere man looks, one can say because the brain has a certain design of intelligence, everything will seem to have a design of intelligence. Modern culture, I'm telling you, secular societies, they will all end up in a simulation. The reason is simple. It's because when you deny other dimensions externally, the only way you're allowing people to access them is internally. And internal dimensions, their whole purpose is to externalize. So we are thinking of traveling to other dimensions, but there's this viewpoint that we have to bring dimensions to here, as if dimensions are traveling to us. Imagine the higher modes and ways of your existence are traveling towards you, you know? We have come far as a species. Even though I've been known to say the sentence that you shouldn't give a history book to someone without a box of tissues, in some sense you must not dare for the metaphysical without the strength to confront what appears. Because this world eventually, for the mind, at least as far as the mind is concerned, is a game of appearances. The body is a different sort of game of appearances. Its texture is stability. So our bodies tend to seek balance. So the more you seek balance externally, the more you become healthier. However, something unique. External balance doesn't mean internal balance. Internal balance can only be found when you stay true, you find out and you stay true to your true nature. There is no other way of finding balance. Every person is like a unique instrument where the whole cosmos is playing you in a certain way. Okay, and you have to be aware of it. You have to hear the melodies of your own vision. This is very crucial because it has nothing to do what other people are saying. Mr. Within is pretty much telling the world that, guys, it's like we have been under the impression that we have to go find knowledge outside. Everybody is looking for some guru, teacher. What is this? You know? It's the study of the mind, the known mind in an unknown landscape. All teachers, doesn't matter if it's a teacher or a student, we're both staring at the unknown universe. The vision of the world is so vast at its core that truth surpasses any hierarchical structure. It's as if like the soul was divided into a ranking system. Even you can wonder about a sort of militaristic hierarchical structure, as if beneath the command of the archangels there were worlds that would listen. And so this world is very fascinating because this hierarchical structure is the movement of our intelligence. Our mistakes are also intelligent activity, but they're mistakes because the result of what they led to did not lead to the short-term efficient vision. Sometimes you never know what happens. You know, there's been moments where I've kind of wanted to vanish from the world, and there's been moments where I've also nostalgia for this omniscient remained until I realized that the thoughts of my life are not more important than the direct experience of life. And this is the war of language, and this is what the greatest philosophers on this earth have been fighting against. They have been fighting against the imprisonment of the limits of experience by belief. They have been fighting to keep the eyes of man open when all ideology and various systems and programs are trying to close man's eyes to a certain reality. They're like, here, I'll give you heaven, but don't ask for another heaven after this. You know, that's the game the world is playing with us. It is a kind of, we're not just looking for money. We're looking for also the things we're going to do with the money. And eventually the things we want to do for the money is access an experience of life not currently accessible. I honestly asked myself, because I was around certain people with spiritual ideas when I was young, and I was like, why? Why does the spirit need to be here? And then I realized, why does the world need to be here? And it was like a part of me was laughing while a part of me was crying, as if the past is always crying but the future laughs regardless. In a strange way, the mystical riddle, the spiritual riddle, is find the self that has found you first. And I will clear this up. It is not something to be kept in the dark anymore for our species. There are other dimensions, but our relationships with them are self-reflective. That means unless you see new dimensions to your own self, you will not see new dimensions to others. And the moment you don't care for others, you might not believe it, but you are actually not caring for a projection of a moment of your mind. That means on some level, the true sage, this is an extreme level I find, even though it's not about extremes, but I'm saying it's an extreme level of sort of mystical awareness, where the reason they don't have enemies is because they see where everything is going. Right now, it's like people think like right now because I realize I'm not a thought and I'm seeing my whole species kind of dabbling in thoughts. It's one of those situations where I am no longer fascinated by human teachers. I am more fascinated by how the future takes performs in the present moment. Pretty much the whole game of the mind is what are you looking at, dear being? That's it. You want to get enlightened, wonder about what you're looking at, and that's it. You attain nirvikalpa samadhi instantly because you wondered about the direction of the speed of your life. You are caring about the velocity of your dreams. You know, in some TV shows, I'm pretty sure a lot of, like, certain people have seen this. The warrior reaches the final boss, and the boss is a reflection of the warrior. That means the last opponent this warrior has to defeat to attain freedom is his shadow self, is pretty much his own reflection. He has to fight the hatred of his mind. And so the only way the warrior fights, every time he tries to hit his shadow self, it's just like trying to hit a mirror. The self, the opponent does exactly what you're doing. So you're kinda in a limbo. Anytime you try to fight yourself, you're stuck. In other words, deny your own true nature. There comes disturbances, turbulence. The only way that the person can in some sense defeat the shadow self is by stopping the war. You see, a part of your mind has declared war, but a part of your mind has an ability to undeclare war. And when it comes to the truths of reality, because there's a sort of self-projection occurring with the mind's phenomena in the moment, you have to in some sense undeclare your war. You have to, it's as if you have been intensely responding to the order. You have kind of looked at chaos and you're like, all right, chaos is a point, let's get angry at the order. And then suddenly in the middle of it you realize the order and the chaos go hand in hand. So why did you not get angry? Why did the chaotic not get angry at the chaotic? To be honest, it is levels of intelligence of our own fragmentation. We fragment the world. It's just a part of the intellectual approach. Just like the scientist breaks up the atom, the person divides the moment into various thoughts. So right now, I've kind of done this to such a degree where it's natural for me now, you know? But my mind has an ability, like as I'm speaking to you right now, I can imagine a geometrical shape and imagine it to such a degree that it is not wavering. So I can visualize something as solid and keep it in my attention as solid as physical reality. And then to a point where after you've kept it solid, you let it hover by its own nature. It's as if your mind creates a design and watches that design move. Okay? And in that process, it is the evolution of the eyes of God through man. It is not, it is a language game to some degree. It's as if, like, if they ask what are the right words to use, it's like, rather than focusing on what words are wrong, which is the whole political correctness movement, it is about wondering how the context can change the concept before the concept has to change itself. You see? So Mr. Within is saying, what if there was another way you could say the story of life that was your true self, not this thing that you are now? What if this moment is as temporal as any other moment in the past you've experienced, and you're constantly moving into the abyss of the future? That is the fascinating part of life. That the fact that our minds are active enough to wonder. It's like, let me tell you what depression and stress is. It is the sign of an incredibly advanced and evolved species. It's the sign that it took you 4 billion years to be able to get depressed. When you get depressed, you should clap for your evolutionary endurance, So you can say stress and depression are modes, or they are parallel realities of the moment. You see, I dabble in this because my mind has learned to be playful with the nature of design. You see, if I ask you what is your favorite color, and you have an answer, one answer could be is because your mind was exposed to that color, or maybe you've never seen that color. That's why you like it, But you see, there is no reason for reason to instantaneously apply. It is a matter of the will. It's as if the soul is the kind of general, and it's like the soul is the emperor, the mind is the general, and in some sense the body is the soldiers, is the army. Your body right now is an army of cells. Like when I move my hand, it's like those cells listen. It's like atoms are not rebelling against how to stay in the moment, It's man's mind that's rebelling against its vision of the world. I say it like this, that it's the heartbeat of humanity. You'll hear it at some point in your life, and you will for the first time consider being responsible for the evolution and advancement of this thing we call civilization. You're going to give a shit about it, because that civilization is the only game left to play. After, let's say right now, you had everything you individually wanted, you were perfect in all the dimensions of your conception. Okay, you would eventually wonder what to do next. So after the self has been gratified to the fullest degree, it will discover the hollowness of the world. It's as if a part of your mind cares for the world, and because it cares, it has accepted its continuity. To be honest, what happens to a person is based on one fundamental choice, where they have moved in accordance to their duality. And what I mean by that is that the child's mind, before learning language, is like, I have a extremely early memory where it was before I learned language, and I was just watching my room as a kid, as like a super young kid. I think I was like, I don't know, like 8 months old or something, like it, not 8 months old, but I'm telling you, it was like before I learned language. I could acknowledge that. And so what I'm trying to say is that before I learned language, I held no allegiance to any reality. I had no guilt. I had no influence. It's as if the child that can't speak yet can't be sold anything. It can't be lied to. You can't lie to a child who doesn't speak the same language. So you see, the allegiance to a sort of ideological position, whether good or bad, has not been made yet. But eventually the child will be exposed to life, and how life happens in the environment of the child defines it. And you really can't control what the eyes of other people see. It's nature. It's like, who can control the wind? It's like the kid went out and shouted at the sun. It's like, sun, get out of here, man. It's too hot. Get out of here. And little did the kid know, it became like the evening, and the sun actually got out of there in some sense. It's I like this concept. I like this concept of Schrodinger's cat. Let me tell you why. Because just like how you can put a cat in a box and like get a machine gun and shoot the box, it's as if whether the cat is alive or not, you don't know. I mean, if it's a machine gun, you probably know, but but because there is that barrier, we don't know the possibility. So Schrodinger's cat is the implication that because the unknown exists, the known is not alone. I find that is the multiplicity it evokes. And so, as we open our minds as a civilization, like think about it, we're creatures that have evolved to a point where we're identifying ourselves to a certain mainstream storyline of the world to fit into the cultural program, to have a sort of financial continuity. So, in some sense, we have to forget who we are and go adjust to the world out there to make a living, in some sense. But at the same time, we come home and we realize the mind is again at its most immediate position. For me, it's like there has been certain moments where how can I say it? Literally, like my consciousness was altered to such a degree because I was drinking too many shots that it reached a certain point where my attention became the space where I was moving in. My attention wasn't just in the body, right? So when they say there's a sort of spatial awareness, how do I say it? It's like any data in the moment is accessible. You see, it's all about acknowledging the instantaneous presence of the moment. When I say instantaneous, it's very hard because it's a portal beyond thought. Thought requires duality. Thought requires a delay. Thought requires something happening somewhere. But only in the realms of the contentment with direct experience you find the voice of every sage as a river behind the eyes of man, a river of an unknown field of intelligence. What I'm saying is, right now, I could have, as a creature, been named anything. And so what I was named comes to me as a coincidence, you know? And because that comes as a coincidence, also my existence, how I am a creature, it comes to me as a coincidence. So when you see when you reverse engineer before the character even began the journey, you find yourself again at an empty piece of paper where the writer can write anew. So a lot of this whole enlightenment stuff has to do with taking the person to a sort of ultimate emptiness. And once you acknowledge the ultimate emptiness, your mind, based on its own nature, realigns to what is the ultimate fullness. And the ultimate fullness tends to, for most people, be a collective vision. That means we have not even started. Imagine we're a species that is just like this artist who's put the tools and everything on the table, like this inventor that's getting ready to invent, and it hasn't started inventing the next grand vision of the civilization. It's as if people wake up, and I think a lot of people are like, "Oh gosh, another day." They're overworked, you know. The system can readjust, just like how you can, talk to someone and collaborate into finding a new idea, you know. Just as many writers in the entertainment sector do. Similarly, what that means is the mind is assuming an internal freedom that allows it to identify outer imprisonment. Okay? It's as if something unique is happening. I realize that on YouTube there's a lot of these thug life compilations against these, what were they called, social justice warriors. And so these thug life compilations, I kind of wondered, in what Colosseum seat am I sitting in watching this video? Only those who can accept their simplicity can walk in complex ways. Leonardo da Vinci says simplicity is the most ultimate sophistication. This simplicity is strange because what I find happens to the psychological structure when the attention goes to the simple is that through stillness and silence there comes I don't want to return like again turn on the flashlight. Okay, and if you become really conscious, you realize every day you wake up, that's what's happening. It's as if the spotlight of your attention is again awakening into this world, as if every day is like a candle. Literally, the candle is lit in the morning, and when you're about to sleep, it's like it's reached the end of the wax, and the lights go out. So you see, the lights will eventually go out, and what, in some sense, the idea of transition and a physical transition implies is that the best thing that change can be is a conscious transformation. Because change has been changing ever since everything's been changing. It's a fear. It's a fear. Let me tell you what it is. Human civilization. It is separated into chunks, separated, fragmented. Human civilization is a cake. We cut up this cake. When we cut up this cake, we realize that it is one moment that has been divided into various chunks. And what I mean by this is that different national values of the different values of nations, which arises from their culture, and their culture has been evolving in accordance to the speed of the change of their language of that culture. Do you see? And where the attention of the people have been going through, because language is pretty much how your attention opens up to the world. So this, what I'm trying to say here is where Mr. Within wants to take the attention of the global online audience to the fact that it's people are not just appearances. Behind their appearance, there is how can I say it? The eyes of the world are seeing way more than they communicate. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, all these sentences that I am in some sense designing, I'm telling you there is so much you don't know and you cannot know, in the same way that if I was to attempt to know you, there would be so much I could never know. Because our eyes start off in their own worlds. And it's our responsibility. The whole point of knowledge is like a blacksmith. You're taking data from other realities and hammering in this sword of your intellect and sharpening your intellect, and not just sharpening, but straightening your intellect in accordance to the field, the electromagnetic field of, let's say, the planet or something. So in some sense, you are being conscious of a multidimensional movement. And because you're being conscious of the multidimensional movement, for the first time, each dimension gets access to one another as well. So this has to do with, after you have mastered a sort of external patience, if you become a person who you can be patient forever, like literally you're never in a rush, because you've kind of realized everybody is going through the same door. A new humanity requires a new command. A new command requires a new vision. The vision is the allegiance of the human mind. That means the whole point of the concept of leadership is not that everybody's going towards where someone is pointing to, you know? The concept of leadership was, Lao Tzu said it best. Lao Tzu is in some sense the founder of Taoism, and he's Confucius's teacher also. And he wrote the Tao Te Ching, an incredible text. I consider it as one of the most important books. They should literally teach that to kids, you know. And the Tao Te Ching acknowledges the concept of the Tao, which the real Tao cannot be spoken about. And if it's spoken about, it's not the real Tao. Okay? So Lao Tzu had this notion of a sort of action through inaction, which means you physically keep the body still to pay attention to how the mind moves. Then eventually, as the body is still and the mind moves, the mind automatically reflects the body. So you see, when the more calm your physical body is, the more your psychology is in conscious control. The more angry you get, the more you get convinced by the thought, and sort of ideological possession begins, because the past has conquered you. That is the worst thing, when your past has conquered you. And I'm kind of like, this happened to me. It still happens to me. Where I find myself in a moment, and the implication of the moment starts being in so many different contexts, echoing in so many different contexts, that my past overwhelms me. And when I say my past overwhelms me, is because we want to live well. And what that means is the vision that we want our energetic expression to contribute to is the most efficient. It's as if you have access to the greatest. It's like, you shouldn't be humble then. There's this story, I think it's about Zen Master Dogen, or maybe Shunryu Suzuki when he was young. It's one of these like epic Zen masters who, I forget his name to be honest, but I think it's one of those guys, And so this Zen master, when he was a young child, let's say at the age of 12 or something, he was in the monastery, and he was a very intelligent and smart kid. It was as if like he brought with himself his own world of enlightenment. And so this kid, in that moment, it's like he breaks this ancient rare vase, and he realized the headmaster, the enlightened guru, is kind of walking in. The enlightened Zen master is passing by. And the kid immediately gathers all the pieces of the vase and holds them behind his hand. So as if there's no pieces of the vase on the ground or anywhere, to some degree. And he just holds the vase behind his hand, and he right up just walks, and he and he's holding this vase behind him. Right? And he goes to the master and he says, I don't know, dear teacher, tell me, what is death? Like a 12-year-old kid asking the Zen master in the Zen monastery, what is death? And this Zen master is like, holy shit, this kid could be truly wise, wise beyond his world. And so the Zen master suddenly goes to a tree. You see the food chain. You see all the factors of life that kind of show that death is kind of written in the design of this world, is it not? But what we call death, that word death, is being ascribed to a change. And that change, we don't know what happens, We are all trying to aim beyond what we see. We are creatures of sight, inspired by that which is beyond our sight. And for now, that appears to be the subjective realm, but then the subjective realm is a sort of sight on its own, so we're again wondering what is beyond our sight. So eventually, it's not about leaving this world and finding another one and being like, yeah, cool, I found another world, yeah, and kind of like, just running randomly in the streets of the cosmos, you have to have and realize the value of your origin, or you will ignore your basic intelligence. Carl Jung has this quote where he says, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Carl Jung says, in such doubtful matters where you have to work as a pioneer, you must be able to put some trust in your intuition and follow your feeling even at the risk of going wrong. This man, you know, he's played the game. Carl Jung says, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." He's giving power to the will of man. He says, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart." Oh, this is the full quote. He says, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." There we go. Wow, this next quote is like a hammer to an ignorant society, a hammer blow to an ignorant society. Carl Jung says, "Thinking is difficult. That is why most people judge." Carl Jung says, where love rules, there's no will to power. And where power predominates, their love is lacking. The one is the shadow of the other. Wow. Carl Jung says, "The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into tortures." It's like this man's really looking into the shadow. Oh, this is another one. He says, Carl Jung says, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do." I feel like he's speaking as if his children are in the room, you know? Oh no, this isn't Carl Jung. Thich Nhat Hanh says, "We are here to awaken from our illusion of separateness." It's like, thanks, Thich Nhat Hanh. I think we'll just focus on Carl Jung. Right? Carl Jung says, "If one does not understand a person, one tends to regard him as a fool." He says, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." Wow. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. And I guess I'll end off as if Lao Tzu was here. And he'd say probably, "You must let go of who you are now to become who you truly are meant to be." That means whatever it is you're doing in this life, wonder about your internal approach towards how the external approaches you, and then in that self-inquiry, the self is its experience, it's its own experiential adjustment. Kinda, your intuition is will become part of your conscious mind in some sense. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and loves.